Time? Can everyone hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What I'm going to talk about today is selling Agile inside an organization and to external clients. I'm not going to waste any time talking about myself, my background, whatever. You can buy me a beer later if you're interested. But I do want to know a little bit about you so I can tailor the presentation as necessary to your interests. So, first, how many people in this room would describe themselves primarily as programmers? Okay. Testers? A handful of testers. Only. Scrum Masters. Wow, a bunch of Scrum Masters here. Terrific. Project Managers? And a bunch of people who consider themselves project managers. And how many of you are in one way or another involved in sales? And a good number of salespeople. Good. Okay. So, what I'm going to talk about is how to go about convincing people inside your organization, especially your project managers, to consider adopting Agile practices. How to convince your sales teams that it's easier to sell an Agile process than alternatives. And finally, how your sales teams can go about communicating the benefits of an Agile development process to your customers. And then if we've got time at the end, I can talk a little bit about Agile contracts. Just so I can pace it correctly, how many of you are really interested in hearing about Agile contracts? Wow. Okay. If for some reason I don't get to spend enough time on Agile contracts in this presentation, I'll do an open space on it. Okay. So, first, project managers. You can't really begin to speak to a project manager about how their life might be different if they had tried a different approach, unless you can get into the mind of a project manager, understand what their world is like.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family. Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy. Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs. Well, that's another thing altogether. Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here. If you look at his face, he's just ripped to shreds, you know.
You see the movies, you hear the stories. I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like it in the world.
Okay, that's been around for a while, but I never get tired of it. I'm sorry. Has anyone never seen that before? Good. Okay, I love that. I saw that for the first time back in the days when I hadn't discovered XP yet. And it spoke to me. So, what's it like to be a project manager on a waterfall-style traditional project? It's important to understand that no matter how enamored you are with whatever Agile development approach, that people are sitting in a comfort zone, which is called a comfort zone for a reason. It's comfortable. Now, I used to be a project manager on projects large and small, using standard traditional waterfall practices, and I'm going to tell you what it feels like. When the project first comes to you, it comes to you in the form of a group of people or an individual who have some need and some vision and some idea. And you become, for a little while, their savior. You're the only person they're talking to about this. And they talk to you a lot. So for a large project that might span years, you're going to be married to this person for 3 to 6 months. And your job is to write the document. And writing the document, as much as people may dread the idea of that big functional specification, writing the document is a very creative and absorbing process. And so during that time, the project manager and the client and other stakeholders who might be involved spend a lot of time sitting in meetings, and they're not sitting in meetings, they're working on documentation. And what this feels like, from a project management standpoint, is a very structured day in which they know exactly what they're doing, exactly what's expected of him, and there are lots of donuts. Lots more donuts in Waterfall than in Agile. There's lots of meetings. And the best part about it is the project manager is really in control of the entire process. If you're talking about like a 2-year-long, multi-million-dollar project, for the first 3 to 6 months, the project manager is king. He knows where he's supposed to be, he knows what he's supposed to be doing, and he's creating something of value. And because the definition of what a complete functional specification is so flexible, it's something that they have a lot of control over. And so almost in every instance, this phase of the project is done on time, on budget, and when it's finished, everyone celebrates that they're 1/3 of the way into the project, and they're still on time and on budget because they wrote the book. And that's when they begin to lose control. So talking to a project manager about less documentation and such is probably not the best approach. But it's when they begin to lose control, which is when they take this documentation to the technical teams and they get their first estimates. And the technical teams sit down and they break down all of the functionality that's been detailed in the document and the tasks. And they estimate all of the tasks using whatever mechanism that they use. And they come back and they say, well, these are all of the tasks, and these are the dependencies, and these are the estimates, and they all add up to X, which will cost so much. Then the project manager has to take that to the client, and the negotiation begins. But even here, it's not that bad, because usually there's a discrepancy between what the client expected it to cost and what the client expected it to take in terms of time, and what the technical team has come back with. But they're still talking about something that's really fuzzy. They're talking about resources as though they were people with specific skills and abilities. They're talking about tasks as though they were real things rather than just an expectation. And so once you've got all of this into your Gantt chart, you can still tweak a lot of things. You can toss some more resources on here and take some resources off here. And you can make this a little simpler. And they estimated that at 10 hours. But if we just take this thing out, I think we can safely call it 5 hours until they get this thing looking like it's supposed to. So they're still somewhat in control. And then it's when development begins that it becomes very uncomfortable for a project manager. Because up until now, they've known exactly what's going on with a project. But from this point on, they only have one tool for finding out what's going on with the project. Are you almost done?
No, not yet.
How far along?
Pretty far.
Like
that much.
Okay. And that is the essence of the reporting that they did for the next 9 months. Everything's 90% done, almost done, finished my part, just waiting on Bob, what have you. And within a matter of days, things start to slip a little bit. And in almost any large project, if you've broken down your Gantt charts into small enough task-based components, things are slipping within the first week or two. But you still have a lot of things that you can work with. You can still shuffle resources into the future. But as the future becomes the present, you get less and less flexibility. Luckily, you've built in a huge buffer at the end of this project. Does anyone know what that buffer is called? Testing. Testing is your buffer, because come on, the project has taken longer than you expected, which means the guys have been working harder than you expected, so the code's got to be solid. They're not going to find anything in testing anyway. So you budgeted 2 months for testing, but 2 weeks will have to do. And then, of course, when the testers get hold of it, and bugs start blossoming and blooming, and you've got 50 bugs, 100, 200, 400, 600. I've seen projects with development teams as small as 50 people that were juggling 2,000 plus bugs in the bug tracking system. Has anyone seen that? You of you? Yeah. And then most of the time, according to the Standish Group studies, most of the time it will go dramatically over, and it then becomes the project manager's job to try to contain the problem as much as possible by getting the damn thing shipped before the company goes out of business. So, this is what it looks like to be a project manager on a traditional project. What you should approach your project managers with is the idea of what it could look like if it was different, by tackling these specific issues in which the project manager is uncomfortable, because you cannot institute change in a person or in an organization without first creating or identifying dissatisfaction. So these are some of the things that an Agile process can give your project managers. More structure throughout the process in terms of knowing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Faster and more accurate reporting, rather than sticking their heads into developers' cubicles and saying, still 90%, you've been 90% for 2 weeks now. You've got burned down charts, you've got definitions done, you've got velocity, you've got much better tools for reporting on what's really happening in the project, even in the very early days. The opportunity to spend their days doing value-adding activities. For the first chunk of the project, it feels value-adding, but the creation of this big document doesn't actually bring any value whatsoever to the stakeholders or the end users. But the idea, as a project manager, of spending your days instead of first creating a document and then trying to cover your ass, of instead being responsible for making sure the processes are going as smoothly as they can be, to make sure that people are learning from their experiences, to make sure that best practices are being followed, and removing impediments. These things directly add value to the end user, and that can be very satisfying throughout the process. Shared responsibility for success, which also means shared responsibility for failure. It takes a lot of weight off of a project manager's shoulders when they have a self-directed team. It's taking responsibility when they're working closely with the client, and the client is sharing the responsibility for helping to identify and solve problems as the project progresses. Better working relationships with clients and coworkers. Instead of having a client who they're constantly making excuses to or constantly answering very uncomfortable questions, and having a bunch of coworkers who they have to micromanage and put pressure on and motivate. Instead, they're facilitating, they're solving problems, they're part of the solution. They're part of the team, which makes for much better, more comfortable working relationships. And, as I said, less time spent trying to cover their ass or their companies, and instead working on solving problems rather than finding blame. The high-level view of what's different for a project manager in an Agile project. The primary role is facilitation. Right now the primary role is reporting, and facilitation is a much more comfortable and much more meaningful role to have. Less upfront planning and more ongoing planning. So instead of spending 3 months writing documentation and the rest of their time trying to keep it from completely becoming a train wreck, they'll be constantly involved in working with the team to do ongoing planning on an iteration-by-iteration basis. Less reporting and a whole lot more talking. A big chunk of the project manager's job is writing weekly reports or monthly reports or sitting in monthly update meetings or what have you. And instead, for creating all of these reporting documents, they're going to spend a lot more time talking to the team, a lot more time talking to the clients in structured ways that keep everybody on the same page. Fewer long meetings and more short meetings. So it's not that they're being relieved of the responsibility for meetings. It's certainly not that, oh my goodness, I'm trading 6 meetings for 600 meetings. Generally speaking, in my experience, the total commitment is about the same. It's just that instead of having those 4-hour, 6-hour, and 8-hour long meetings that go on for weeks at the beginning of the project, they've got a 15-minute meeting every single day, plus a retrospective and a sprint planning meeting once every iteration. And, like I said, less time trying to avoid blame and more time acting in a real problem-solving capacity. If I go too fast, feel free to stop me. So this first step is building the right team. And this is a topic for a whole other presentation. But you can tell your project managers that if they put together the right team for the project, then the whole rest of the job becomes a whole lot easier. Picking the right people who have the right set of skills and the right personalities to work together, and then helping them to understand the problem that needs to be solved. This is something I love about the software industry. My very first management experience was working in a prison, and for a couple of years my job was cooking food for 1,500 inmates, and my team was a bunch of rapists, murderers, and drug dealers. And after that, Then going to software, where suddenly I'm surrounded by people who are more intelligent than me. It's terrific. If you help get the team on board with what it is that they're trying to solve, the problems that the customer's trying to have, you harness all of that brain power and turn them from code monkeys fulfilling tasks on a Gantt chart into part of a creative solution to problems. And then give them space, time, and the structure and resources they need to do their job, and you get a motivated team that you don't have to have all-night pizza debugging sessions with, or threaten, or cajole, or whatever, in order to try to accomplish the client's purposes and your purposes. They're motivated themselves because they're emotionally involved in what they're doing. There's still planning, and I'm not going to go. This part of the presentation, there's a bunch of chunks of this that were covered really well in the keynote. So occasionally I'm going to skip forward because I assume you don't want to hear the same thing that you just heard a couple hours ago again. So the process of planning becomes, as Henry described it, iterative planning, and sprint planning. They do the planning of the overall high-level plan. But rather than writing all of that documentation, instead they're constructing all of the user stories and identifying user roles, communicating that to the team, and then working with the team doing planning poker to get their initial estimates of the backlog and working with the clients to prioritize and such. In terms of documentation, there's less of the huge piles of documents to manage and piles of reports to manage, but there's a lot more conversations to manage, obviously, and then there's the big visible charts which allow everyone to see exactly what's going on in the project. In terms of daily tracking, rather than sticking their heads in the cubicles, they've got the daily stand-up meetings. They've got the burn-down charts, which gives them really accurate data that they don't have to go and rest out of the heads of the programmers. They get to actually see features as they're being finished, and they get to see them with clients and get real-time feedback. And of course, they can also spend their time monitoring risks and looking for potential problems that might crop up. So once your project manager says, well, you know, that sounds really good. That's the kind of life I would like to be living when I'm not with my family and I'm stuck in this workplace with all of you. How do I do it? There's a school of thought that will dramatically disagree with me, who says that the only way to introduce an Agile process into a company correctly is to bring in an Agile coach who can make sure that the team doesn't make any of the common mistakes that lead to bad experiences and scrapping the idea entirely. And they have a point. I'm sure that happens in some organizations. All of my experience leads me to believe that taking your best shot at it, as long as you do it with an open mind, leads to enough improvement to create a continuous cycle of improvement. So it will take longer without bringing in an expert coach. But I believe that the best way to start doing an Agile process is to take a project where you've got a good small team, preferably something that's internal, maybe something that's not being too highly scrutinized by the outside for your first few iterations. But just take the project and set a demo date. Tell the stakeholder, whoever it is, we will show you working with software on X day, not too far in the future, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Sit with that person in the team and figure out what you can demo on that day, what they feel comfortable demoing on that day. Then start doing daily stand-up meetings. And the Scrum approach is a very good way to start. If you don't have any other, the 3 Scrum questions, the chicken and pigs, the rules and such. But you can adapt these if something else works better for your team. And then, on that day, at that time, do the demo you promised you would do. No excuses. Whether it works or not, sometimes a demo fails simply because there was a bug that kept anything from working. That's a valid learning experience the team has a right to have, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. And then, sit together as a team, reflect on what that felt like, and try to identify areas for improvement. If you do that, and you do it with an open mind, with a group of intelligent people who want to see it work, I believe you'll see dramatic improvements in your process. I've heard it said, and I think I agree, that any team that's intelligent and open-minded and does retrospectives will eventually come across an Agile process, whether they've ever been trained in it or not. There's so much in it that is just common sense. Now, I'm getting some water. Selling Agile to the salespeople. Sales in software is really, really difficult, mostly because salespeople are technical. And what they're selling seems to be a very technical thing, software. And so, not being able to fully understand the technology, they start selling software, when what they're actually selling was a service. And how do you sell software? The client says, I need something that does this. You say, okay. And I need it to do this too. And you say, I'm sure our guys could do that. And I need to have it before Christmas. We'll make it happen, buddy. Without really necessarily understanding everything that goes into the promises they're making. You end up with that Dilbert kind of scenario in which marketing makes the promises and then they become engineering's problem. And engineering somehow or other either has to solve the problem, or, again, as the Standard Groups studies reveal, usually they fail. And I think that's one of the big areas in which the projects collapse, is because when the contract is signed, most salespeople get their commission and they're done. But, again, think about what motivates salespeople. Mostly it's that commission. Or the person involved in sales is also an owner or a senior manager in the company, and so they're interested in the company's success. Nothing brings higher commissions or more success than repeat business and good references. And so creating a great customer experience that leads to repeat business or leads to customer recommendations and referrals is a great way of automating the sales process. You do this well enough, long enough, you can stop selling altogether. People will be pounding on your door to ask you to build their software for them, which is essentially the situation I find myself in now. I do no marketing anymore. So what that general view of what you should be telling salespeople is that the benefits of an agile process are easy to understand. I'm going to go over that in the next segment. That happy clients lead to repeat business. That experienced buyers know the cost of poor quality because they've seen cost overruns, they've seen budget overruns, and they've seen the enormous maintenance costs that come from overly complex projects that were poorly architected and were spent the last several months of their life being cobbled together by a bunch of unpaid interns because it was so far over budget that nobody wanted to put a good team on it. They just had to get the darn thing done. And then it cost a fortune to maintain until it's eventually scrapped. If they're experienced, they've seen this and they fear it. And if they're inexperienced, they've heard the stories and they fear it. So if you can sell quality in the process, that addresses that fundamental fear that most clients have. And you can sell the experience of being a purchaser, of an agile software service, the experience of being a product owner as the key benefit, the key differentiating benefit, which is a rather easy sell, and this is how you do it. For clients, the main points that you want to make to clients, and I'll explain these in a bit more detail, is that a high-quality process leads to lower maintenance costs, to a lower total cost of ownership. That the client remains in control of the project. Clients are not used to having any measure of control at all once a software project is initiated. That they have a great degree of flexibility. Most clients have experienced the dreaded change request. How many of you are in companies where a client has to submit a change request for evaluation? That's a horrible experience for a client. Have a great idea and toss it into a bureaucracy of rumbling managers and programmers who all say, oh, this is going to screw up everything. So the idea that they can get new ideas and incorporate them into the process, or if their competitor comes up with a great new feature that they didn't think of and they need to get it in, they can do that without going through that process, is very compelling. That agile processes produce lower cost software, and I think that was well illustrated in Henrik's presentation. And that they have a lot of insight into the process, so they're not going to be really stressed about what's going on. Let's take a look at how your clients think about software. How many have seen this video? Yeah. What you're about to witness is a buffer overflow. Okay. I could go on and give a list of all the big catastrophic software failures Google the term famous bugs, and you'll come up with a list of all of the projects where software bugs kill people with radiation machines overexposing them and things like that. But even closer to home, just take a look at the software that your clients use every day. I remember a time, and anybody my age or older will remember a time, when a perfectly good, fully functional word processor that did everything you needed with advanced formatting and mail merge and everything fit onto a 360K floppy. And now it takes a DVD to hold all 4.7 gig of Microsoft Word, and you still have to download patches every week. Software in general is bulky, awkward, difficult to use, bloated, buggy, and full of security holes. And this is the kind of software that's written by some of the best minds who've been working on it for years, and it's in widespread use worldwide. Just think how a custom project would look compared to that, with a fraction of the testing and a fraction of the real-world usage. Customers expect the software that you write for them to suck even worse than the stuff that they use every day. And when somebody expects software to suck, the natural thing to do is to not pay any more for it than they have to. So this is the problem that you're running into. They expect to have a miserable experience of throwing their ideas over a wall, and then getting a bunch of excuses back, and finally having to force the project out, settling for whatever it is that they can get, with no other tool at their disposal than volume-based motivation. If you can give a guy who's used to dealing with a software company in this way, when there's cost overruns and he's not satisfied with the way in which the product works, an alternative which is compelling, a positive experience in which they are in control and get what they want, they will choose it every time. Here's where I'm going to be able to skip a bunch of stuff. Yeah, more code leads to more bugs. The best way to reproduce errors is to, you've seen this? It's like everybody using this all the time. This is an old study. This is from the 2000 study. My goodness, we should all know this. By the way, side note, never ever trust the conclusions of any study you haven't read. Really. The number of times that I see some study quoted in the press, and then I go and I read the study, and the way that the press expressed the conclusions was not what the study was about at all. Don't go citing the things you've read the report. It takes only about half an hour to read. It's not a big read. It's very enlightening. And the projects that they use in the study may have nothing whatsoever to do with the kind of work you're doing. But in any case, obviously the best way to produce less buggy, less complex software, faster and cheaper, is just to write less of it. So we can skip that. You've seen this too. I have always liked talking about the triple constraints a little bit differently than everybody else does. Because I've seen what happens when a company starts losing money every day because the project is over budget, it's fixed price, or what have you. And they start taking their best people off because they're too expensive, and they start working long hours when people don't do their best work and such. So in my opinion, these are the triple constraints. The amount of time it takes to do it, what gets done, and how high quality it is. Because it's quality that suffers when you start trying to develop a project after it's going over budget. And this is the kind of thing that a client can understand. You can tell this to a customer, and they get it. Which is that if you want to force a fixed time and fixed scope contract on somebody, you are going to sacrifice quality. And you always pay for quality in the end. You always do. My father used to say something about used cars, and this is a bit dated, but he used to say, a used car costs you $1,000. You can either buy one for $100 instead of costing $900 to get it running smoothly, or you can buy it for $1,000. Same thing with software, except I think it's even more exaggerated, because poor quality costs more later on than building in quality would cost. So if you can sell them on the idea of getting what they can afford, the best software that they can afford, without all of those maintenance costs, it's a very, very compelling argument. And one of the things that I've found is if you do a convincing enough job of selling something, especially if you've got a client who's coming to you and said, we're putting this out to bid, we'd like you to enter a bid, we're talking to 20 other software companies. If you can get them on the phone, and you can talk to them the way I'm talking to you right now, and you can get them nodding their head and saying, yes, yes, in fact, what I would like is control, and what I would like is high quality, and what I would like is a process that's transparent. And the next thing that happens is they get 19 proposals in from other companies who just filled in the proposal like they always do based on an RFP. But that's not what they're looking for anymore. What they're looking for is this experience that delivers high-quality software in a way that keeps them in the driver's seat. And you're not even competing anymore. You've already won. Because the bid has changed, the request has changed. Time box iterations are a great selling point. The main things that I like to talk about time box iterations with clients is one, you can stop when you want to. And this may be, I once had a client who stopped just a few iterations into a project because he was trying to create something that was already operating in a larger market, and that company moved into his market. He realized he just couldn't compete, so he stopped. But sometimes clients stop. In fact, usually clients stop because they're done. My experience is that customers who do come to me with a functional specification with a list of 100 features they want generally are happy and cancel the project and release it when they have about 80% of those features done. And some other things that they thought of along the way. So the idea that they can release when there's enough value to release. What's more, you can also get early releases if you want to. If you're building a big accounting system with hundreds of features for your whole accounting department, but at the end of the second iteration, it generates this one report that Bob has to run every Friday, and it takes them a whole day to get the numbers together, and now it's automated. If 8 hours a week of Bob's time is worth more to you than the cost of deployment, because there's always some cost of deployment, then you can go ahead and deploy that iteration 2 version, and all of a sudden, at least Bob is really happy and is using your product once a week and giving you valuable feedback and becoming an enthusiastic supporter of the project. You can change vendors easily. This makes some people uncomfortable, but the fact of the matter is that right now, you're just trying to get a customer to make a decision. And their biggest fear is that they're going to be tied in to a never-ending relationship with the wrong person. Because they don't know until they're well into the commitment whether or not you're actually capable of doing what you said you're going to do. So when you tell them that, yeah, typically if you do a big project halfway through it, if you take it out and take it to another team, you're going to have a bunch of half-finished features, you don't know what the quality of the project is, and most of the time another team is going to look at it and say, we can't work with this, it's too complex, it's not tested well enough, there aren't enough automated tests. There's a bunch of half-finished features that we don't know what they're supposed to do, a bunch of code we don't understand. You'd be better off just writing it from scratch. And you can trust us, we won't do to you what just happened. Of course they will. But when you're releasing production quality work on an iterative basis, then at the end of every iteration, you've got something that you can take that code to another team. If for some reason that the first team goes out of business or you're not satisfied with the relationship or whatever, you can take it to another team and say, this is a piece of software. It works, it's fully functional, there's nothing half-finished in this, there's no spaghetti code. We just need you to add these 10 more features to what's already there. It's a much easier thing for them to do with another client. So this makes your customers feel very comfortable. And finally, they have control over the scope. And clients don't often know that this means that they can pull things out. That's not what they're thinking of now. But the idea that they can put things in without causing a complete disaster and going through that big bureaucratic change request process is very comforting for a client. And then you can sell them on the experience, what they're going to be doing, what their role is, and the fact that they'll have a role. And a lot of clients don't realize once the planning process is over, they're not used to having any role other than receiving reports and getting on the phone and yelling at the project manager when it looks like things aren't going well, even though that doesn't actually accomplish anything. Having that kind of ongoing role in which they get to meet every single human being who's coding on the project, which they get to see features as they're finished and give immediate feedback and make sure everything is done right from the start, as opposed to getting something at the end that they're not fully satisfied with, is really exciting and compelling, and it can be a huge differentiator if your competitors are not doing this. So get them, they're the ones who are going to be living this project for the next month, 6 months, year, 2 years, however long it's going to be. Let them know that their life is going to be good. It's going to be positive, it's going to be pleasant, it's going to be social, it's going to be informed, they're going to be part of the process, they're going to know what's going on, and they're going to have control. If your competitors are doing that, you wouldn't sail already. Because everybody fears what the next few months or years is going to look like in their life with a waterfall project. All right. Now, a few more general observations about service sales in general that I just want to share. One, a lot of people try to sell their technical expertise. If you're on the phone with a client, they've already decided that you're competent. Most clients are not competent to assess your abilities as a development company. But what clients are incredibly good at is figuring out whether you're paying attention to them, whether you understand them, and whether you care about them. So when the time comes to make a decision between one or another service provider, that's going to be the deciding factor. Not the guy who's got 100 years combined experience, but the guy who gets it, has some ideas, and has some enthusiasm to communicate with him and value him. Another point that I've noticed over the years of working with other software companies, because I like to create cooperative, competitive environments wherever I work, is that internally, within an ecosystem, companies might compare themselves to each other, but it's not very helpful when you do that with your customers. When you say, we are great because we do this and nobody else does this, or we are better than them because we have more people, we have more experience, or what have you. Because your biggest competitor is not the other team down the street. Your biggest competitor is that the client is afraid that none of you are any good because everything that he's experienced or everything that she's heard about software development was very negative. And maybe it would be better to do it in-house, or maybe it would be better not to do it at all. So focus on, I encourage people to focus on one thing that they're really good at, one thing, and I think the experience of being a client in an Agile process, or the quality differentiation that happens when you focus on quality rather than fixed scope, fixed time arrangement, is a core differentiator rather than trying to compare yourself to others. I can skip this too because it's the last presentation. So pick one thing to stand out. Another mistake that salespeople across service industries always make is they say, you should choose us because of this, and this. When everyone is saying that to a person making a purchase decision, they end up saying, well, let's see, there's these 10 things that are good about this company, there's 20 things that are good about this company, there's 6 things that are good about this company, and they don't remember any of them. But if you tell a client one thing, one real, compelling differentiator, and you drive it home with everything you do, whether it's quality, or control, or fun, or whatever it is.
What is in your case?
In my case, it's fun. I've had customers, this is kind of a funny story, and it leads into my next slide. I had a customer once, I asked him what his budget was to build out what he wanted to build. And he said, I'm not telling anybody my budget, because I'm afraid you'd spend all of it. And I said, no, that's no problem. I'll find out. Because in my experience, if you make the software development process fun and engaging, and the client really enjoys how easy it is to get their ideas and turn them into reality, they'll spend every last penny they have. So their budget is what they're going to end up spending. One of the things that we've done in my company, we're doing now, which is kind of funny, is we've actually bought a hostel, and we're outfitting it, a hotel room in it, for our customers to stay there, on the theory that if when they come to visit us, they don't have to pay for a hotel, they'll end up putting that money into the software development too. Lastly, be honest with clients, talk simply, don't try to overwhelm them, don't use jargon. Now, for example, let's say you want to hire a house painter to paint your home. And I come to you and say, you should choose me because I'm committed to excellence. Jargon goes in one ear, out the other, and it actually lowers the credibility of of whoever is saying it. Whereas if you could just be honest and open, expose your flaws. I've had clients ask me, how can you guarantee that you'll complete this within the estimate? And I say, I can't. We've done over 100 projects now, and I've got some real doozies under my belt where we've just blown the hell out of a budget. But what we found is, of all of these projects, I've had 4 that have gone dramatically over budget, more than 15%, and 3 of them have almost doubled the budget. And the one thing that they all had in common is they were all really small projects. They were projects that we originally estimated as just like 2 to 6 weeks. And so what we've learned from this is we really, really suck at estimating small projects, because there's just too many factors that can influence it and not enough time to adapt. And the client then trusts me unless they have a very small project, in which case they don't trust me. Or at least, even if you do have a small project and you hear that, and I say, I've had projects this small go 200% over, but everybody else is saying, no, right on the money. Our estimates are always correct because we're committed to excellence. Then they're still more inclined to trust me and to not believe those other people. Because if a guy like me can have 3 projects go dramatically out of budget, then how can all of these other people be doing everything exactly right? So be honest with your flaws, talk simply, use plain English, and don't try to use jargon. It doesn't work. Yes, tell the straight truth without embellishment. Okay. Oh, and the last important point is a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that when they've got the signature on the contract, they won. That the client has, in their infinite wisdom, looked at all of the options and said, you guys, you are the best possible development partner for this project. But that's not what's happened at all. And it leads to some of the biggest problems that people have with their clients during the first weeks or months of a project. And the problem is this. When a client is signing a contract, they're not saying, you guys are the best. What they're doing is they're saying, okay, I'm willing to do a huge favor and give you guys a chance to prove that you can actually pull this off. And it's a huge favor their clients do when you're talking about a software project, because they're not going to start realizing value, even with an agile process, for weeks. And they're committing a lot of time and energy and resources and passion and money to you. And so you're starting the project with the balance on their side. They have given you something. They have given you a great deal of trust. They've made a big commitment in you. And they expect you to appreciate that. So, now, and you can read everything I just said later. So, show gratitude from the very start. And how do you show gratitude? By creating a great experience for the customer, by showing your appreciation for being part of the project. Never stop marketing. Don't stop marketing when you get that signature on the contract. Every single point of contact that your company has with a customer is marketing. If they come to visit, it's marketing. If they call and your receptionist answers, the way that he answers that phone is marketing. If you send a contract to be signed, that's marketing. And if it's not as good as it can possibly be, you're missing an opportunity to cement a relationship, especially at a time when buyer's remorse is at its highest. I'm not going to give away all my secrets, but one of the things that I did which made a big difference in the quality of the relationships that I had with clients in the early days, with the number of referrals that I got from clients, is a simple thing. It used to be when I finished a sales call and the client said, okay, let's do it, I would then email them a contract and say, please print this, sign it, and fax it back to me. Does that sound common enough? Is that the way it usually works? Just me? When I started thinking about these things, I decided how can I make that experience, the experience of signing my contract, better and better and better and better and better until it's as good as it can possibly be. And so I commissioned a company to design and make a box, a very nice black box, black on black printing, embossed logo. Apple set the standard for packaging, I thought, and that's the standard I wanted to match. So we've got a nice box, and in the box I put a copy of Scrum and XP from the Trenches, which I think is the best book I found yet for easily introducing clients to what is going on in the background when their Agile team is working. I hired a designer to do a brilliant design for planning poker cards, and I got the best printing company I could to do the best quality printing of the planning poker card, plastic laminate, the whole thing. That was in there. I had custom printed Moleskine notebooks with our logo on it because Moleskine is a top quality brand, and I want to associate my brand with other top quality brands, so that goes in there. Then there's 2 copies of the contract printed on the highest quality paper I could find with letterhead, a handwritten letter from me thanking them for the trust that they're putting in us, and then I put in a self-addressed envelope ready to be returned. And I collect postage from every country I go to, so I've got postage from every country that my clients work in. So they don't have to queue at the post office, and they don't have to ask, how much do I have to put on this envelope in order to send a copy of a contract to Poland? There's already British, Belgian, American postage on the letter. Every little detail. And we've taken the same approach to every single point of contact we have with clients. And the result is, and we send it by FedEx. So if the person gets off the phone and says, okay, I want to work with you, before lunch the next day, this is on their desk. That affirms all the trust that they just put into me when they said, yes, we want to work with you. And it really changes the atmosphere of those early interactions. When there's a developer on the team who doesn't understand the concept and has to explain it again, the client doesn't think he must be an idiot. So the client comes into this already feeling like this is something different, this is something special. And you have to keep that feeling alive in the client. Otherwise, they interpret everything they see through some other filter, which may not be so flattering. Okay, Agile contracts. How much time have we got left? 10 minutes? Cool. Overview of Agile contracts. These are some different types of contracts: fixed price, time and materials, optional scope, satisfaction guaranteed, CSDM, pay per use, and co-sourcing. I'm not going to read everything on these slides, but they're on SlideShare. I'm just going to do an overview of the pros and cons of different kinds of contracts. But first, why have a contract in the first place? A lot of people have contracts because there's a lack of trust. The idea is the contract exists in order to say what people's responsibilities are and to make sure that neither party yields to the temptation to act against the interests of the other in their own interests. Which means that they usually have lots of measures and controls, and measures and controls are very expensive to maintain and enforce. You'll see that my preference for contracts are contracts that are based on trust, and any time the trust is lacking, use incentives rather than metrics. And I'll show you how this is done. First, I think the best contracts give the responsibility to the person best able to manage it, and the people best able to manage the quality of the project, technical decisions and such, is the vendor, the development team. But the client is the person who's most able to control the scope. And so I like to have some kind of arrangement in which the product owner can do their job to their best ability and have control over the scope changes and such, and the development team can do their job to the best of their ability. Fixed price. How many of you work primarily on fixed price contracts? That's not bad. I used to ask that question. See, where's my water? I used to ask that question and get answers like almost everybody in the room. Fixed price contracts don't have to be bad. Fixed price, fixed scope contracts can be difficult to work with. Obviously, the downside is that the development team might find themselves in a position in which they go over budget and then they're losing money. It supposedly protects the client. But again, this is something that I tell any client who asks for a fixed price contract, is that if we get a fixed price and a fixed scope with an unknown quality, and the unknown quality is the inventive process that is software development, then I may have the best motivation in the world, I may have the best development team in the world, but if we come to a point where I've got a bunch of very expensive employees coming to work every day and earning absolutely nothing for me and I have to pay them anyway, eventually that's going to become an intolerable situation. And my options are break the trust and break the contract to get it out no matter what, to argue over details in the functional specification and say, well, I know you're really unhappy with this, but the specification does say this, and if you read it this way, it means what we wrote. Or to make people work overtime, and there are companies I know who make people work unpaid overtime when they get into the situation, and nobody does their best work when they're not being compensated and they're working 12, 14 hours a day. To take good people off a project and put on interns, you tell a client that if anybody will do this. No company can run forever without making any income. And they get this. So, understanding the quality is inevitably going to suffer. The other thing they often tell people who want a fixed price contract is that nobody knows for sure how much a project is going to cost. For one thing, at the early stages when you're doing the estimations are notoriously inaccurate. And there's going to be some shift. There's going to be some learning that takes place. There's going to be some change in the specifications. And so whatever estimate you've got, the project is guaranteed to cost either less or more than that. If you've got a fixed price contract and the price ends up being more than the estimate, then quality is a huge incentive to lower quality. Any place where the contract doesn't protect the client from that happening. And if it comes under that, the client's overpaying. So those are my two big arguments against a fixed price contract. The time and materials contract, the buyer is perceived to bear all the risk. So that their fear is the development team is going to start working and invoicing them every week or every month for ever and never finish. And I've actually had a great deal of success on selling using this type of approach because a lot of these fears that are associated with this are addressed by iterative processes. If you've got that transparency, if you've got the option of canceling a contract if it looks like it's going on forever, if it looks like it's going over budget, moving, you can switch teams, and you give the client that kind of flexibility, they're no longer afraid of the things that they're usually afraid of in a time and materials contract. An optional scope contract is something that a lot of companies I've kind of used with people who are very uncomfortable with the whole idea of entering into a long-term Agile relationship. And this is essentially the same as a time and materials contract with fixed points at which the contract can be reached, so that they only agree sprint by sprint. Because if you look at it, if you're charging time and materials for a fixed group of resources, for a fixed group of people, for a fixed amount of time, that's a fixed amount of money. So it's essentially saying, give us $10,000, we'll do a 1-month sprint. If you're happy, give us another $10,000, we'll do another 1-month sprint. And this is really the illusion of a fixed price in what is essentially a auto-renewing time and materials contract. But it can be a great way to get people who are really uncomfortable with fixed price to convince their accounting departments to go for it. Target cost contracts are interesting. There's too many animations. Target cost contracts say that we're going to aim to do this thing for $50,000, and we're both going to work together to do that. And so they make the scope flexible. And there's a specific variation of the target cost contract, which I've used, that I'll talk about at the end. Satisfaction guaranteed contracts are time and materials contracts with no profit. All the profit comes at the end in the form of a bonus when the client says, yes, you've done a great job. And this is somewhat scary for the development team because you're afraid that nobody's going to ever claim to be satisfied, and they might try to get out of making that final payment by saying, it's okay, but we'll stop now, but we're not really satisfied. But in reality, this almost never happens, especially with larger companies. There's a DSDM contract, and there's a lot of great resources on the web about this. The idea that I lifted out of the DSDM contract that I like is a different way of approaching optional scope, and that is a contract in which you estimate a set of functionality, but for each feature you identify it as a must-have feature, a should-have feature, a could-have feature, or a won't-have feature, and you only guarantee that under the contract for the fixed price that they'll get the must-haves. And they have some flexibility because they can shift the priorities during the process. So it's essentially a kind of a flexible scope, fixed price contract. Pay-per-use or profit sharing. This is a contract that is in some ways really risky because it means that you have to have a very long-term trusting relationship with the client, but it does a great job of aligning incentives. Everybody wants the products to add value because the contract says that as soon as people start buying the software or as soon as people start realizing benefits from the software, some of those benefits come back to the vendor. But it is difficult to do because it requires a lot of trust. And my favorite, this is something that I concocted years ago when I was doing a project for the United Nations, which is of course a huge organization, very bureaucratic. Ended up being a 2-page contract, which is a bit rare for me. I usually like 1 page. And it said that we're going to try to do it for this price. We guarantee that it won't go higher than this, no matter what. And that was high enough with their accountants that we really hope that doesn't happen. But it encapsulates our risk. It caps our risk. And then we put incentives to try to hit the target cost. And the incentives were that if it went over the target cost, we would work cheap or a huge discount. Not so huge that I would pull resources off the project. We could still commit to quality because it wouldn't hurt that bad. But big enough that I would really like to get it finished and make sure that that doesn't happen because I've got other profitable projects I could do. And then the incentive on the other side is that if we could somehow come in under that target cost, we split the difference. So if we managed to make the whole thing cost 10,000 less, we get a 5,000 euro bonus. So everybody was working together to control the scope to try to hit that target cost. And we went only slightly over. It worked very well. Whew, that's it. Do we have time for questions? I don't know, it's supposed to end in what, 3 minutes? Okay, first question gets a lifetime subscription to Kanban.
I have already.
Okay, second question gets a lifetime subscription to Kanban.
Can you tell a bit more about what kind of customers, what kind of companies?
Everything. I deal with everything from the guy who's got a great idea who sold his car and borrowed money from his mom to build out what's going to be the next Facebook, to, like I said, the United Nations, Swisscom, huge companies. I'll show it to you. I got a copy. This is my contract. I've sold about $10 million worth of software using this contract. And the only variation was the United Nations when I had to add an extra paragraph that didn't fit. Next question.
But in corporate clients, we need to procurement costs. So they don't know how to make a contract. I mean, what type of partners or make contract. I mean, corporate clients,
Are incapable of doing it.
They prefer making tender with the margin.
Well, that's exactly my point, and I get those. I kind of enjoy them. They're very satisfying. Oh, I'm sorry, because we don't have a microphone for you. Yeah, the question was that big companies often like to have a very rigid tendering process, and they don't understand the values of these things. I used to do this on a much larger scale. When I was in South Africa, I was responsible for doing government tenders for a large, one of the largest service organizations in the country. And what I found is ultimately there's a person who's a decision maker, a person who can make it happen. You're not talking to that person, you're completely wasting your time, no matter what you do. But if you are talking to that person, and they buy into this idea, then I've never had a situation in which somebody has said, I love you, I want to work with you, you're the best company ever, but there's this tender process. Except governments. Governments can have requirements that they choose the lowest bidder or so. But even then, there's usually a lot of flexibility. We had a lot of government contracts in which we were not the lowest bidder, because there's usually language in there that says the lowest qualified bidder. And then they just tweak the qualifications to make sure they match your company specifically. No, if somebody really wants to work with you because they're in love with your process, they're not going to let a tender process get them over. Or you're talking to the wrong person.
No, you're right, but didn't make huge companies didn't make not one, because now like corporations
I think we can talk about this in a little bit more detail later. It catch me on at the open space or talk. Paul, you have the next question. U.S. Oh, I always sign NDAs. There's only one NDA I wouldn't sign, and that was one that, this is so hilarious. The guy sent me an NDA, and it said, if we suspect that you violated this NDA, whether it's confirmed in court or not, you owe us $1 million. Aside from that, I've got no problem with NDAs. Can you think of any reason why one might? Okay. Any other questions?